You've been carrying the weight of what they said, of how they acted, of what they didn't do when you needed them the most. And the truth is, you haven't told many people how deeply it stung because you've learned to swallow the hurt, smile through the disappointment, and keep moving like it didn't crack something inside you. You don't want revenge. You're not looking to fight. You just want peace. The kind that doesn't require you to lose yourself in the process. But what no one talks about is how hard it is to keep showing up as a good person when people keep giving you reasons not to be. So today, we're not just talking about how to deal with them. We're talking about how to protect your heart without building walls, how to stay grounded when their actions try to shake you, and how to heal without needing them to understand what they broke. Some pain doesn't leave a bruise, but it stays with you. It shows up in how guarded you've become, how you double-check your tone, your text, your presence, just to avoid being misunderstood or mistreated again. And the hardest part, the person who hurt you may never even realize what they did. Or worse, so they know, and they still did it anyway. This kind of hurt doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes with confusion, with silence, with pretending it didn't affect you when deep down it did. And if you're not careful, that pain can start to shape how you show up. Not just with them, but with everyone. This conversation is about finding a new way forward, not for them, but for you. It's about handling the hurt without becoming hardened, setting boundaries without losing your compassion, and learning that your peace doesn't need their permission. Let's walk through this together. There are moments when someone says something, maybe casually, maybe in the middle of an argument, and it lands deeper than they realize. To them, it might have just been a sentence, a quick reaction, a throwaway comment, but to you, it's stuck. It hit a place you've been trying to protect. Maybe they joked about something you're insecure about. Maybe they questioned your intentions when all you've done is try. Maybe they brought up something from your past you trusted them with and used it like a weapon. And what makes it harder is that they often don't even realize the impact. They keep going, move on, while you're left sitting with a pit in your stomach, replaying the moment over and over, wondering if you're overreacting or just finally seeing things clearly. This is what happens when someone's words cut deeper than they know. It creates a silence. Not always on the outside, but definitely on the inside. You pull back. You start choosing your words more carefully. You start avoiding certain topics. Not because you're weak, but because that moment broke a little trust. And trust doesn't just snap, it erodes slowly with moments like that. Moments where you didn't feel seen, where you didn't feel safe. And here's the part most people miss: you don't always speak up about it. Not because you're afraid of conflict, but because you've learned that naming your hurt can sometimes cause more of it. So you hold it, you carry it, and it changes the way you show up in the relationship. Now, let's be honest, we've all been on both sides of this. We've all said something we didn't mean or didn't think through. We've all been careless with our words. So this isn't about blame. It's about awareness. It's about recognizing the power of words and relationships, how they shape the emotional tone, how they build or break connection. And if you've been on the receiving end of those deep cuts, I want to remind you your feelings are valid. The pain is real, even if they didn't intend to cause it. You're not being too sensitive. You're being human. And humans bruise in places the eye can't see. But you don't have to stay stuck in that bruise. Part of emotional maturity is learning how to feel the pain without letting it harden you. It's learning to speak up when necessary, not to attack, but to clarify. That comment didn't sit right with me. When you said that, it felt like you were dismissing me. These aren't accusations, they're invitations to be heard, to be seen, to reset the emotional temperature. And if the person values you, they'll listen. If they don't, their response will tell you more than their words ever could. You don't need to absorb everything people say to you. Some words are more about them than they are about you. Your job is to stay grounded in who you are, even when someone else forgets to be careful with your heart. Speak truth, stay kind, and never shrink your voice just to keep the peace that's costing you your self-worth. There comes a point when you realize that not everything deserves your reaction. Not every comment, not every mood shift in someone else, not every unmet expectation needs to be carried on your shoulders. That moment, the one where you start choosing your peace over pleasing people, it feels powerful. But it can also feel confusing, because how do you protect your peace without shutting people out? How do you create space to breathe without building walls so high no one can reach you? That's the quiet tension a lot of us carry. We want calm, we want boundaries, but we also want connection. And it's easy to start believing you can't have both. If you grew up feeling responsible for everyone else's emotions, or constantly walking on eggshells in relationships, then learning to prioritize your peace might feel selfish at first. But it's not. It's self-honoring. The problem is when we've been overwhelmed or hurt too many times, we often swing the pendulum too far the other way. We isolate. We withdraw. We convince ourselves that keeping distance is the only way to feel safe. And sometimes it is for a season. But long-term, peace isn't about isolation. It's about intention. It's about learning how to stay rooted in who you are, even when the people around you are spinning in their own emotions. That's not coldness. That's clarity. See, protecting your peace doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop overextending. It means you stop trying to manage how everyone else experiences you. It means you start recognizing when your nervous system is sending you signals that is too much, and you listen. But here's where the emotional intelligence comes in, learning how to communicate those boundaries without making people feel like they're the problem. Because sometimes we don't say, I need a little space to think. We just go quiet. We don't say, I care about you, but I need to reset before I respond. We just disappear, and people feel that. They don't always understand it, but they feel it. So the goal isn't just peace, it's relational peace. The kind that honors both your limits and your connections. It's okay to say, I'm not in the right space to talk about this right now, but I will come back to it. It's okay to say, I need to be alone, but it doesn't mean I'm pushing you away. That kind of communication doesn't come from fear. It comes from emotional maturity. And if someone doesn't respect that, that's not your burden to carry. You're not responsible for other people's discomfort with your boundaries. You're responsible for being clear, honest, and kind in the way you express them. So if you've been pulling away out of self-protection, I get it. But don't let fear write your script. Let clarity do it. Let grace do it. You don't have to choose between protecting your peace and keeping your relationships. You just have to stop confusing silence with strength. Strength is found in the balance, knowing when to speak, when to step back, and how to do both with love. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that saying no means you don't care. That drawing a line is disrespectful. That putting yourself first, even when you're stretched thin, even when you're emotionally tapped out, makes you selfish. So you kept giving, kept absorbing, kept saying yes when you meant no just to keep the peace. And now you're exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally, because every time you go against your own boundaries to accommodate someone else, a little piece of you gets quieter. You start losing the ability to hear yourself in the noise of trying to keep everyone else comfortable. But here's the truth. Boundaries are not betrayal. Boundaries are clarity. They're a way of saying, this is where I end and you begin. Not because I don't love you, but because I do love me. And if I'm constantly stretching myself to meet your needs while ignoring mine, that's not love. That's erosion. It's slow, it's subtle, but over time, it chips away at the core of who you are. And then one day you wake up and realize you've built a life where everyone else is comfortable except you. When you start to set boundaries, real clear, kind ones, don't be surprised if some people don't take it well, especially if they've benefited from your lack of them. Some will guilt you. Others might distance themselves. They'll say you've changed, that you're being cold or distant or selfish. But what they're really saying is, you're not bending for me like you used to. And that's okay. Not every reaction is your responsibility. Your job is to stay anchored in your values, not their comfort. The people who truly care about you won't make you feel guilty for taking care of yourself. They might need a minute to adjust, especially if you're showing up in a new way, but they'll get it. They'll learn how to meet you in this new space. The people who don't, they were attached to your compliance, not your connection. It takes courage to set boundaries when you've been trained to keep everyone happy. It takes emotional strength to say, I love you, but I need space, or I'm not available for that right now, or even, I won't allow myself to be spoken to like that. Those words might feel foreign in your mouth at first, shaky, unsure, but they're the beginning of you reclaiming your voice. They're not an attack. They're an invitation to respect. Boundaries aren't about building walls. They're about building doors with locks, with keys, with intention. So you choose who walks through and how far they come in. It's not about punishment. It's about preservation, because your mental health, your peace, your sense of self, they matter. And the people meant for you will understand that. They won't see your boundaries as rejection. They'll see them as a sign that you finally understand your worth. And they'll meet you there, not in control, not in guilt, but in mutual respect. There's a quiet heartbreak that happens when you're the kind one in the room, when you go out of your way to keep things peaceful, to avoid unnecessary tension, to show up with patience even when you're the one being pushed. And somewhere along the way, kindness became confused with passivity. People started mistaking your grace for weakness. They pushed your limits, ignored your needs, and still expected you to show up soft every single time. And because you didn't want to be labeled difficult or rude or ungrateful, you kept swallowing your frustration. You kept holding the door open, even as people walked right past you without a thank you. This is where so many good-hearted people get stuck. You want to keep showing up with love. You don't want to become bitter. But deep down, you're tired, not because you've done too much, but because the weight hasn't been shared. You're tired of having to be the emotionally mature one in conversations that lack maturity. Tired of having to explain basic respect. Tired of giving grace to people who use it as a reason not to change. And here's what you need to know. Staying kind does not mean staying silent. Being gentle does not mean being invisible. There's a big difference between kindness and self-neglect. One honors both people. The other sacrifices one for the sake of the other. You can speak up and still be kind. You can say, "That doesn't work for me," without raising your voice. You can say, "I felt dismissed when that happened," without tearing someone down. Your words don't have to be sharp to be strong. And just because someone gets uncomfortable when you express a boundary doesn't mean you're being unkind. It means you're honoring your self-worth. And that's the real shift, learning that kindness includes you too. Some people won't like the version of you that stops over accommodating. They'll miss the version of you who never pushed back, who said yes even when it drained you, who absorbed their moods and still showed up smiling. That's okay. Let them miss it. You're not abandoning your kindness. You're expanding it. You're learning to be kind as and clear, kinda and firm, kinda and no longer willing to be stepped on. It's not your job to carry every relationship on your back. It's not your responsibility to shrink so others feel more comfortable. The right people won't put you in positions where your kindness has to be a constant sacrifice. They'll see it, they'll value it, and they'll reciprocate it. So if you've been feeling the tension between staying true to your heart and protecting it, you're not alone. That's the work. That's the balance. You don't have to pick between kindness and strength because they were never opposites. True kindness stands tall. It speaks honestly. It loves with boundaries. And it knows if I have to lose myself to keep the peace, then it's not peace. It's just silence pretending to be something noble. And you were never meant to live quiet in places where your voice matters. One of the hardest things to accept is that some people will never give you the apology you deserve. They won't acknowledge how they hurt you. They won't admit the role they played. And in some cases, they'll rewrite the story in a way that paints you as the problem, just so they don't have to face their own discomfort. And you're left sitting in the silence they created, not just with the pain, but with the questions. Was it really that bad? Did I overact? Was I too sensitive? That internal replay is its own kind of heartbreak. Because when someone refuses to see the damage they caused, it makes you feel like healing means letting them off the hook. And that's not true. Healing without the apology isn't about excusing what happened. It's about choosing not to carry the weight of their denial. It's about recognizing that closure doesn't always come from a conversation. Sometimes it comes from finally telling yourself the truth they couldn't. That it did hurt. That it was unfair. That you didn't imagine it. That your feelings weren't too much. It's learning to validate your own pain when the person who caused it won't. And that takes a level of strength that's hard to explain until you've had to live it. You can grieve something even if no one else understands why it hurts. You can miss someone and still know they weren't safe for your heart. You can love someone deeply and still need distance because they're not willing to meet you in accountability. We get stuck when we think we need both the apology and the healing. But waiting for someone to take responsibility when they've shown you they won't, that's a slow erosion of your power. You deserve more than healing that's held hostage by someone else's willingness to face themselves. Forgiveness in this space is not about saying it's okay. It's about saying, it happened, and I refuse to let it define how I see myself anymore. You don't forgive to let them off the hook. You forgive to unhook yourself, to stop checking your phone for the message that may never come, to stop mentally rehearsing what you'd say if they finally came around, to stop losing sleep over a version of the conversation that only exists in your head. Your peace matters more than their recognition. And if you've carried this kind of pain, the kind where you know what you deserved, but you didn't get it, I want you to know something. You're not weak for wanting the apology. That's human. But you're powerful for deciding to move forward anyway. That's growth. That's ownership. That's you choosing to stop giving someone else's silence the final say in your story. You can heal. Even if they never say a word, because healing isn't about them. It's about you reclaiming your heart, your clarity, your strength. And sometimes the most freeing thing you'll ever do is whisper to yourself, I know what happened, and I deserve peace anyway. There's a specific kind of ache that comes from always being the one who cares more. You notice the distance before they do. You're the first to reach out after an argument, the one who checks and follows up, initiates. You put effort into the relationship like it's a garden, watering it, tending to it, while they just show up to enjoy the shade. And after a while, even your kindest intentions start to feel heavy, because love should be mutual, not one-sided. Support shouldn't have to be begged for. And when you're always the one carrying the emotional weight, it slowly teaches you that your needs aren't worth bringing up because they probably won't be met. That kind of imbalance doesn't always look dramatic. It's subtle, quiet. You'll make space for them on their worst days, but when yours come, there's silence. You'll listen deeply to their frustrations, their dreams, their disappointments, and when you finally try to open up, the energy shifts. They're distracted, dismissive, or just not available. And so you start adapting. You tell yourself, it's fine. You lower your expectations. You convince yourself you're asking for too much. But deep down, you know something's not right. Because relationships aren't meant to feel like performance reviews. You shouldn't have to earn basic care. The truth is, when you're always the one who cares more, it's not just tiring, it's lonely. Even with someone right beside you, you can feel alone. Because the emotional labor is unbalanced, because your tenderness is met with indifference, because you're carrying a connection that's supposed to be shared. And maybe they're not cruel. Maybe they're not even aware. But lack of awareness doesn't make the impact less real. You still feel it in the way you second guess yourself, in how much you hold in just to keep things calm, in the quiet resentment that builds from always giving more than you get. And I want to say something clearly: caring deeply is not the problem. Your empathy, your thoughtfulness, your consistency, those are not flaws, those are strengths. But those strengths deserve to be met, not drained. You're allowed to want reciprocity. You're allowed to stop chasing after someone who's only meeting you halfway. And if bringing up the imbalance leads to defensiveness or blame instead of understanding and change, believe that. That's not partnership. That's proximity without investment. You don't have to stop being the person who shows up, but you do need to stop pouring yourself out for people who only take. There's nothing wrong with wanting someone who checks in first, who remembers what matters to you, who matches your effort, not just in the big moments, but in the ordinary ones too. That's not neediness. That's emotional maturity. And you deserve that without having to prove your worth to get it. If you're always the one who cares more, it's time to ask yourself, am I building a relationship or am I just holding it up on my own? Because love isn't about being the most invested. It's about being invested together. And when you find someone who meets you there, that's when care becomes connection, not a chore. There's a shift that happens when you've argued one too many times with someone who doesn't really hear you. At some point, it's not that you don't have words. It's that you've run out of the need to explain yourself to someone who's already decided not to understand. And that's where silence becomes less about avoidance and more about self-protection. Because there's only so many times you can go in circles, repeating the same points, hoping that this time they'll get it, and they don't. Not because you weren't clear. Not because you didn't try. But because they're more focused on being right than being close. Choosing silence over arguments that go nowhere doesn't mean you've given up. It means you're learning the difference between fighting to be heard and choosing your peace. There are moments when speaking up feels like shouting into the wind, not because your words aren't valid, but because the person on the other end isn't listening with the intent to understand. They're listening to respond, to defend, to deflect. And you're left exhausted, wondering how a simple conversation turned into another emotional tug of war where no one wins and nothing really changes. This is especially hard when the person means something to you. You want to fix it. You want to feel close again. But every attempt to connect ends up triggering the same old pattern, one of defensiveness, blame, shifting, shutdown, or escalation. So you start pulling back, not to punish, not to manipulate, but because you've finally learned that not every situation deserves your energy. Not every disagreement is yours to resolve. Not every emotional mess belongs on your shoulders. And that silence, that space you're choosing, it's not weakness, it's restraint. It's maturity. It's the understanding that yelling louder doesn't make someone listen better. That explaining again doesn't fix willful misunderstanding. That peace isn't found in winning an argument. It's found in not needing to have one at all when it's going nowhere. There's a difference between silence that avoids the truth and silence that honors your own. But this doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring differently from a distance, if you have to. It means you stop pushing for clarity from someone who chooses confusion. You stop chasing repair with someone who's content with the status quo. And that's a hard place to land, especially when all you ever wanted was connection, not control. But if the only way to stay close is to shrink yourself, to silence your truth, or to pretend things don't bother you when they do, that's not closeness. That's emotional costuming. So if you've been feeling guilty for going quiet, take a deep breath. There's nothing wrong with stepping back from chaos that's become too familiar. You're not the villain for choosing calm over conflict. You're not cold for needing space. You're simply learning to stop over-explaining your pain to people who haven't earned the right to hear it. And that's not silence out of bitterness. That's silence rooted in wisdom. It's a strange kind of pain when you keep showing up for someone who makes you feel like you're on the outside looking in. You're present. You're trying. You're doing your best to hold space, to stay connected, to let them know you care. But what you get in return is distance, short answers, avoidance, that feeling like you're being tolerated more than valued. And no matter how kind you are, no matter how much you reach, it feels like there's a door that keeps closing just as you get close. You're left wondering if you did something wrong, or if they've already emotionally left the room but haven't said it out loud. When you feel shut out by someone you care about, it stirs up something deep, because your instinct might be to try harder, to overfunction, to prove your worth, to earn your way back in. But let's pause there, because showing up doesn't mean chasing. Showing up doesn't mean abandoning your own needs just to feel needed. There's a difference between being emotionally available and being emotionally abandoned in disguise, where your entire presence is wrapped around trying to break through someone else's walls, even when they're not willing to meet you halfway. Here's what's hard dodged. Sometimes people shut down not to hurt you, but because they don't know how to handle closeness. Maybe they weren't taught how to stay present when things get real. Maybe vulnerability feels like a threat to them. Maybe they're in their own pain and don't have the language to say, I don't know how to let you in. And while understanding that can grow your compassion, it can't be the reason you keep pouring into a space that's emotionally unavailable. Empathy should not become your excuse to be mistreated. So how do you show up when you feel shut out? You start by showing up for yourself first. You check in with your emotional capacity, not your guilt. You ask yourself, am I staying in this dynamic because there's love here or because I'm afraid of losing it? You stop tying your value to how much someone else responds and start measuring your peace by how honestly you're honoring your own voice. Showing up might mean saying, I feel like there's distance between us and I don't want to keep pretending it's not there. Not to accuse, not to force anything, but to name the truth that's already in the room. And sometimes showing up means stepping back, not in anger, but in clarity, not to manipulate them into caring, but to protect your emotional balance. You can't force intimacy. You can't argue someone into being emotionally present, but you can choose how long you stay in a space where you keep knocking and no one opens the door. Real connection is a two-way street. And if you're always the one carrying the weight of that connection, eventually it's going to break your back or break your heart. You don't have to shut down just because someone else did, but you also don't have to keep sacrificing your emotional safety just to stay close. You can show up with love and boundaries. You can care deeply and still walk away from coldness. That's not giving up. That's choosing to no longer abandon yourself while waiting for someone else to finally show up. There's a moment after the disappointment where you don't just question the other person. You start questioning yourself. You think, how did I miss that? Why didn't I see it coming? Or worse, why did I let it happen again? When someone lets you down, especially someone you trusted deeply, it doesn't just hurt your heart, it rattles your sense of judgment. Suddenly, every decision feels a little less certain. You second-guess your instincts. You play the past on loop, looking for the signs you should have seen, the boundaries you should have set, the words you should have said. And what's even heavier is not just the loss of the relationship. It's the loss of confidence in yourself. That's the part most people don't talk about. We talk about getting over them, but we don't always talk about how to rebuild trust with the person you now doubt the most, Ryu. And here's the truth. That self-doubt doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're paying attention. You're trying to figure out how to move forward without repeating the same pain. That's not weakness. That's awareness. But awareness without grace becomes self-blame. And that's where we have to slow down, because punishing yourself for someone else's lack of integrity won't make you safer next time. It'll just make you smaller, more hesitant, and more disconnected from your own voice. Trusting yourself again starts with understanding that being let down doesn't mean you're naïve or foolish. It means you showed up with hope. It means you were willing to believe in someone. And while yes, maybe you ignored a few red flags, maybe you stayed longer than you should have, but that doesn't mean you're incapable of discernment. It means you're human. You were trying. You were choosing connection. And that's not a flaw. That's something to honor. But now it's time to listen differently. Not louder, just differently, with more patience, with more honesty. Not with fear, but with clarity. That gut feeling you keep ignoring, it's not drama. It's data. That sense of unease you brush off. It's not paranoia. It's wisdom shaped by experience. You're not broken. You're learning. And you can trust that process, even if it's slower this time. Letdowns don't erase your ability to choose well. They just remind you to stay awake, to pay attention to what people show you the first time, to trust your hesitation without needing to explain it away, to say no without guilt and yes without fear. Rebuilding self-trust isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up for yourself consistently, honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about being the one person you don't abandon when things get hard. And the more you show up for you, by honoring your boundaries, by walking away when your peace is threatened, by choosing people who feel safe instead of familiar, the more that trust returns, quietly, gently, like a voice inside that says, you've got this. Even if they let you down, you won't let yourself go again. That's where the healing happens, not when they come back with an apology, but when you come back to yourself with compassion. Love can be quiet. Love can be loud, but it should never be so overpowering that you can't hear yourself anymore. And yet, for so many of us, that's exactly what happens. You enter a relationship with a full voice, clear, thoughtful, steady, and somewhere along the way, that voice gets softer. You start holding back your opinions to avoid conflict. You start editing your needs so you don't come across as too much. You swallow discomfort, second guess your instincts, and tiptoe around things that matter to you. Not because you don't care, but because you care so deeply, you're afraid of rocking the boat. You think, if I say this, will they pull away? If I set this boundary, will they stop loving me? That fear is real. It doesn't come from nowhere. Maybe you've been punished for speaking up in the past. Maybe love for you has always meant being agreeable, flexible, easygoing, even when it costs you something. And you start convincing yourself that the only way to stay close is to stay quiet. That conflict means danger. That discomfort means distance. So you keep giving the benefit of the doubt, keep choosing peace over honesty, keep saying you're fine when deep down you're not. But here's the truth: love without voice isn't connection. It's performance. It's you playing the role of who they want you to be instead of living as who you truly are. Real love doesn't require silence. It invites honesty. It creates room for both voices to be heard, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's messy. Because love isn't just about getting along. It's about growing alongside each other, even when the growth stretches both of you. That can't happen if only one voice is allowed in the room. Losing your voice isn't always dramatic. It's in the little compromises that go unnoticed, the jokes that sting but you don't call out, the conversations you avoid because you already know how they'll react. And over time, those moments add up. And then one day, you wake up feeling small, not because someone made you that way, but because you slowly abandoned yourself to keep the relationship afloat. But here's what I need you to hear. You can love and still say no. You can be kind and still be clear. You can be generous and still have needs. The people who truly see you, the ones who are safe for your soul, they won't see your voice as a threat. They'll see it as a bridge, a path back to each other. They'll listen, not just because they agree, but because they care. So if you've been quiet for too long, if your needs have been sitting on the back shelf of your relationship, it's okay to speak again. You don't have to come out swinging. You don't have to defend yourself. You just have to be honest. Softly, steadily, consistently. Because the most grounded love you'll ever experience is the one where your voice doesn't have to disappear in order to stay. Where love and self-respect can sit at the same table. Where you can speak and still be held.